The 2000 Summer Olympic Games, officially known as the Games of the 27th Olympiad and commonly known as Sydney 2000 or the Millennium Olympic Games, Games of the New Millennium, were an international multi-sport event which was celebrated between the 15th of September and the 1st of October 2000 in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. It was the second time that the Summer Olympics were held in the Southern Hemisphere, the first one being in Melbourne, Victoria, in 1956. Sydney was selected as the host city for the 2000 Games in 1993. Teams from 199 countries participated. The United States won the most medals with 93, while Australia came in fourth with 58. The Games' cost was estimated to be $6.6 billion. The Games received near universal acclaim, with the organisation, volunteers, sportsmanship and Australian public being lauded in the international media. Bill Bryson from The Times called the Sydney Games one of the most successful events on the world stage, saying that they couldn't be better. James Mossop of the Electronic Telegraph called the Games in an article such a success that any city considering bidding for future Olympics must be wondering how it can reach the standards set by Sydney. While Jack Todd in the Montreal Gazette suggested that the IOC should quit while it's ahead, admit there can never be a better Olympic Games, and be done with it, as Sydney was both exceptional and the best. In preparing for the 2012 Olympic Games in London, Lord Coe declared the Sydney Games the benchmark for the spirit of the Games. Unquestionably, and admitting that the London Organising Committee attempted in a number of ways to emulate what the Sydney Organising Committee did. These were the final Olympic Games under the IOC presidency of Juan Antonio Samaranch. These were also the second Olympic Games to be held in spring. The final medal tally was led by the United States, followed by Russia and China, with host Australia at fourth place overall. Several world and Olympic records were broken during the Games. Host city selection. Sydney won the right to host the Games on the 24th of September 1993, after being selected over Beijing, Berlin, Istanbul and Manchester in 4 rounds of voting. At the 101st ISE session in Monte Carlo, Monaco, the Australian city of Melbourne had lost out to Atlanta for the 1996 Summer Olympics 4 years earlier. Beijing lost their bid to host the Games to Sydney in 1993 and was eventually awarded the 2008 Summer Olympics in July 2001. Costs. In 2000, the Auditor General of New South Wales reported that the Sydney Games cost $6.6 billion, with a net cost to the public between $1.70 and $2.4 billion. Many venues were constructed in the Sydney Olympic Park, which failed in the years immediately following the Olympics to meet the expected bookings to meet upkeep expenses. In the years leading up to the Games, funds were shifted from education and health programs to cover Olympic expenses. It has been estimated that the economic impact of the 2000 Olympics was that $2.1 billion has been shaved from public consumption. Economic growth was not stimulated to a net benefit, and in the years after 2000, foreign tourism to NSW grew by less than tourism to Australia as a whole. A multiplier effect on broader economic development is not realised as a simple multiplier analysis fails to capture, as that resources have to be redirected from elsewhere. The building of a stadium is at the expense of other public works such as extensions to hospitals. Building sporting venues does not add to the aggregate stock of productive capital in the years following the Games. Equestrian centres, softball compounds and man-made rapids are not particularly useful beyond their immediate function. In the years after the Games, infrastructure issues have been of growing concern to citizens, especially those in the western suburbs of Sydney. Proposed rail links to Sydney's west have been estimated to cost in the same order of magnitude as the public expenditure on the Games. Chronological summary of the 2000 Summer Olympics. Preliminary matches from the 13th of September. Although the Olympic Games opening ceremony was not scheduled until the 15th of September, the football competitions began with preliminary matches on the 13th of September. Among the pre-ceremony fixtures, host nation Australia lost 1-0 to Italy at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, which was the main stadium for the 1956 Melbourne Olympics. Day 1 to 15 September cultural display highlights. The opening ceremony began with a tribute to the Australian pastoral heritage of the Australian stockman and the importance of the stock horse in Australia's heritage. It was produced and filmed by Sydney Olympic Broadcasting Organisation and the home nation broadcaster, 7 Network or Channel 7. This was introduced by a lone rider, Steve Jeffries, and his rearing Australian stock horse Amo. At the cracking of Jeffries' stock whip, a further 120 riders entered the stadium, their stock horses performing intricate steps, including forming the 5 Olympic rings, to a special Olympics version of the theme which Bruce Rowland had previously composed for the 1982 film The Man from Snowy River. The Australian national anthem was sung, the first verse by Human Nature and the second by Julie Anthony. The ceremony continued, showing many aspects of the land and its people, the affinity of the mainly coastal-dwelling Australians with the sea that surrounds the island continent, the indigenous occupation of the land, the coming of the First Fleet, the continued immigration from many nations and the rural industry on which the economy of the nation was built, including a display representing the harshness of rural life based on the paintings of Sidney Nolan. 2 memorable scenes were the representation of the heart of the country by 200 Aboriginal women from Central Australia who danced up the mighty spirit of God to protect the games, and the overwhelmingly noisy representation of the construction industry by hundreds of tap-dancing teenagers. Because the wife of Juan Antonio Samaranch, the IOC president, was seriously ill and not able to accompany her husband to the Olympics. Former Australian Olympic champion swimmer and member of the NSW State Parliament, Dawn Fraser, accompanied Samaranch during the Australian cultural display, explaining to him some of the cultural references that are unfamiliar to non-Australians. Formal presentation. A record 199 nations entered the stadium, with a record 80 of them winning at least 1 medal. The only missing IOC member was Afghanistan. The ceremony featured a unified entrance by the athletes of North and South Korea, using a specially designed unification flag, a white background flag with a blue map of the Korean peninsula. The 2 teams competed separately, however. 4 athletes from East Timor also marched in the Parade of Nations as individual Olympic athletes and marched directly before the host country. Although the country to be had no National Olympic Committee then, they were allowed to compete under the Olympic flag with country code IOA. The Governor-General, Sir William Deane, opened the Games. The Olympic flag was carried around the arena by 8 former Australian Olympic champions: Bill Roycroft, Murray Rose, Leanne Tooth, Gillian Rolton, Marjorie Jackson, Lorraine Crapp, Michael Wendon and Nick Green. During the raising of the Olympics flag, the Olympic hymn was sung by the Millennium Choir of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of Australia in Greek. Following this, Tina Arena sang a purpose-written pop song, The Flame. The opening ceremony concluded with the lighting of the Olympic flame. Former Australian Olympic champion Herb Elliott brought the Olympic flame into the stadium. Then, celebrating 100 years of women's participation in the Olympic Games, former Australian women Olympic medalists Betty Cuthbert and Raylene Boyle, Dawn Fraser, Shirley Strickland, Shane Gould and Debbie Flintoff-King brought the torch through the stadium, handing it over to Kathy Freeman, who lit the flame in the cauldron within a circle of fire. The planned spectacular climax to the ceremony was delayed by the technical glitch of a computer switch which malfunctioned, causing the sequence to shut down by giving a false reading. This meant that the Olympic flame was suspended in mid-air for about 4 minutes. rather than immediately rising up a water-covered ramp to the top of the stadium. When the cause of the problem was discovered, the program was overridden and the cauldron continued its course, and the ceremony concluded with a spectacular fireworks display. Despite his record achievements as an Australian sprinter, Peter Norman was not invited, chiefly because he had participated in an anti-racial protest during the awards ceremony for the 200 meters race in the 1968 Mexico City Olympic Games. The AOC disputes that he was snubbed, stating that no other former athletes were invited and that Norman was offered the same chance to buy tickets as other former athletes were. During the Sydney Olympics, a reporter from the Washington Post found only one reference to Norman, an image on the side of a house in Redfern, a predominantly Aboriginal area. The house may actually have been in Newtown, where a mural of the awards event known as Three Proud People was painted in Leamington Lane facing the railway adjacent to McDonald Town Station. Day 2 to 16 September. The first medals of the Games were awarded in the women's 10-meter air rifle competition, which was won by Nancy Johnson of the United States. The triathlon made its Olympic debut with the women's race. Set in the surroundings of the iconic Sydney Opera House, Bridget McMahon, representing Switzerland, swam, cycled and ran to the first gold medal in the sport, beating the favoured home athletes such as Michelle Jones, who won silver. McMahon only passed Jones in sight of the finish line. The first star of the Games was Ian Thorpe. The 17-year-old Australian first set a new world record in the 400 metres freestyle final before competing in an exciting 4x100 metres freestyle final. Swimming the last leg, Thorpe passed the leading Americans and arrived in a new world record time, 0.2 of a second ahead of the Americans. In the same event for women, the Americans also broke the world record, finishing ahead of the Netherlands and Sweden. Samaranch had to leave for home, as his wife was severely ill. Upon arrival, his wife had already died. Samaranch returned to Sydney 4 days later. The Olympic flag was flown at half-staff during the period as a sign of respect to Samaranch's wife. Day 3 to 17 September. Canadian Simon Whitfield sprinted away in the last 100 meters of the men's triathlon, becoming the inaugural winner in the event. On the cycling track, Robert Bartkau beat fellow German Jens Lehmann in the individual pursuit, setting a new Olympic record. Leontien's Elard van Moorsel set a world record in the semi-finals, the same event for women. In the swimming pool, American Tom Dolan beat the world record in the 400 meters medley, successfully defending the title he won in Atlanta 4 years prior. Dutch woman Inge de Bruijn also clocked a new world record, beating her own time in the 100 meters butterfly final to win by more than a second. Day 4 to 18 September. The main event for the Australians on the fourth day of the Games was the 200 meters freestyle. Dutchman Peter van den Hoogenband had broken the world record in the semi-finals, taking it from the new Australian hero Ian Thorpe, who came close to the world record in his semi-final heat. As the final race finished, Van den Hoogenband's time was exactly the same as in the semi-finals, finishing ahead of Thorpe by half a second. China won the gold medal in the men's team all-around gymnastics competition, after being the runner-up in the previous 2 Olympics. The other medals were taken by Ukraine and Russia, respectively. Elard van Moorsel lived up to the expectations set by her world record in cycling in the semis by winning the gold medal. Day 7 to 21 September. Controversy erupted at the women's gymnastics all-around final, when gymnast after gymnast fell on the vault. Some gymnasts were physically injured, and all were shaken, but nothing was done to try to discover the reason. Most gymnasts were having severe problems. Finally, in the middle of the second round, it was determined that the vault horse had been set 5 centimeters too low, a small amount, possibly, but to these world-class athletes, enough of a difference to have thrown off their impeccable timing to the extent that true performance was impossible. This situation led directly to the elimination of Svetlana Korkina from consideration as the top all-around gymnast. Day 9 to 23 September by rowing in the winning coxless 4. Steve Redgrave of Great Britain became a member of a select group who had won gold medals at 5 consecutive Olympics. The swimming 4x100-meter medley relay of B.J. Bedford, Megan Kwan, Jenny Thompson and Dara Torres became the first women's relay under 4 minutes, swimming 3:58 and setting a world record, claiming the gold medal for the United States. Day 10 to 24 September Rulon Gardner, never a NCAA champion or a world medalist, beat Alexander Karelin of Russia to win gold in the super heavyweight class, Greco-Roman wrestling. Karelin had won gold in Seoul, Barcelona and Atlanta. Before this fight he had never lost in international competition, had been unbeaten in all competitions in 13 years, and had not surrendered a point in a decade. Day 11 to 25 September Australian Cathy Freeman won the 400-meter final in front of a jubilant Sydney crowd at the Olympic Stadium, ahead of Lorraine Graham of Jamaica and Catherine Mary of Great Britain. Freeman's win made her the first competitor in Olympic Games history to light the Olympic flame and then go on to win a gold medal. The attendance at the stadium was 112,524, the largest attendance for any sport in Olympic Games history. In a men's basketball pool match between the USA and France, the USA's Vince Carter made one of the most famous dunks in basketball history. After getting the ball off a steal, the 6 feet 6 inches (1.98 meters) Carter drove to the basket, with 7 feet 2 inches (2.18 meters) center Frederic Weiss in his way. Carter jumped, spread his legs in midair, scraped Weiss' head on the way up, and dunked. The French media dubbed the feat Le Dunk de la Mort. Day 14 to 28 September the Canadian flag at Athletes Village is lowered to half-staff as Canadian athletes pay tribute to former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau after hearing of his death in Montreal. The Canadian flag flew at half-staff for the remainder of the Olympics, on orders from both IOC President Juan Antonio Samaranch and Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Axworthy, as the state funeral did not take place until the 3rd of October. Day 16 to 30 September Cameroon won a historic gold medal over Spain in the men's Olympic football final at the Olympic Stadium. The game went to a penalty shootout, which was won by Cameroon 5-3. Day 17 to 1 October the last event of the Games was the men's marathon, contested on a course that started in North Sydney. The event was won by Ethiopian Gemzinga Abbott, with Eric Wananina second and Tessif Dola, also of Ethiopia, third. It was the first time since the 1968 Olympics that an Ethiopian had won the gold medal in this event. The closing ceremony commenced with Christine Anu singing her version of the Warumpi Band's song, My Island Home. She performed with several Aboriginal dancers atop the Geodome stage in the middle of the stadium, around which several hundred umbrella and lampbox kids created an image of Aboriginal Dreamtime. The Geodome stage was used throughout the ceremony, which is a flat stage which is mechanically raised into the shape of a geode. IOC President Juan Antonio Samaranch declared at the closing ceremony, I am proud and happy to proclaim that you have presented to the world the best Olympic Games ever. Subsequent Summer Olympics held in Athens, Beijing and London have been described by Samaranch's successor, Jacques Roger, as unforgettable, dream games, truly exceptional, and happy and glorious games, respectively. The practice of declaring games the best ever having been retired after the 2000 Games. The Olympic hymn was sung by soprano Yvonne Kenny. The ceremony also featured performing artists such as Jimmy Barnes, INXS, Midnight Oil, Kylie Minogue, Slim Dusty, Christine Anu, Nikki Webster, John Paul Young, Men at Work, Melbourne-based singer Vanessa Amorosi, Tommy Emmanuel, and pop duo Savage Garden. The Games were then handed over to their modern birthplace, Athens, which succeeded Sydney as Olympic host city. 2 Greek flags were raised, one to honor the birthplace of the Olympics, and the other to honor Athens. The ceremony concluded with a huge fireworks display on Sydney Harbour. The fireworks display itself concluded with a very low flyover of Stadium Australia by an RAF F111C, which performed a dump and burn maneuver, synchronized with the extinction of the Olympic flame. This created the appearance of the flame being carried away into the sky, flying in a northeasterly direction out across Sydney Harbour and ultimately towards Athens in a symbolic handover. In honour of her gold medal win during the Games, Cathy Freeman represented Oceania in carrying the Olympic flag, joining Archbishop Desmond Tutu, John Glenn, Kazuyoshi Funaki, Lech Walesa, Jean-Michel Cousteau, Jean-Claude Killy, and Steven Spielberg when it was raised again. At the 19th Olympic Winter Games in Salt Lake City, the opening ceremony there took place on 8 February 2002. Sports. The 2000 Summer Olympic program featured 300 events in the following 28 sports. Although demonstration sports were abolished in 1992, the Sydney Olympics featured wheelchair racing as exhibition events on the athletics schedule. Special quarantine conditions were introduced to allow entry of horses into Australia to participate in equestrian events, avoiding the need for such events to take place elsewhere as had happened at the 1956 Summer Olympics in Melbourne. Calendar.